Lightning split the Nebraska sky as Eliza Moore drove her stolen horse through sheets of rain, her stepfather's shout still echoing in her ears. Thunder drowned out her sobs. She was running from a forced marriage, from a man who'd killed her mother, from a life that had become a prison. Through the storm, a cabin appeared like a miracle. Inside stood a stranger with hard eyes and calloused hands. When he moved toward her, every instinct screamed danger. "I'm afraid of you," she whispered. The cowboy stopped, stepped back, and said 5 words that would change everything. "Then I'll earn your trust." If you want to know how a frightened woman and a lonely cowboy found hope in the American frontier, stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and comment your city so I can see how far this story travels. The storm came fast, the way all bad things seem to come in Eliza Moore's life, without warning and with terrible violence. She'd been riding for 3 hours through the Nebraska territory, her stepfather's gelding beneath her, the animal's flanks slick with rain and foam. The sky had turned the color of a bruise, purple-black and swollen, and the wind carried the smell of electricity and wet earth. Eliza's hands were numb on the reins, her fingers locked in a grip born of desperation rather than skill. She'd never been much of a rider. Her mother had always said ladies didn't need to know how to handle horses. That's what men were for. But her mother was dead now, had been for 6 months, and the men in Eliza's life had proven themselves to be something far worse than useless. The rain came harder, turning the prairie into a blur of gray and brown. Eliza's dark hair had long since escaped its pins, plastered against her face and neck. Her traveling dress, the nicest one she owned, the one she'd worn thinking it might protect her, might make her look like someone worth respecting, clung to her body, heavy and cold. She couldn't feel her feet in the stirrups anymore, couldn't feel much of anything except the terror that had been her constant companion since she'd slipped out of her bedroom window that morning, a small bag clutched in her hands and her mother's wedding ring hidden in her bodice. She was 19 years old, and she was running for her life. Lightning cracked across the sky, so close she felt it in her bones. The horse screamed, actually screamed, and reared. Eliza's numb hands couldn't hold on. She felt herself sliding, the world tilting, and then she was in the mud, the impact knocking the air from her lungs. The horse bolted, disappearing into the storm, and Eliza lay there for a moment, gasping like a fish pulled from water. "Get up," she told herself. "Get up or die here." She'd heard stories about people caught in prairie storms. They froze to death, or drowned in flash floods, or were struck by lightning and found days later their bodies burned black. She'd heard about women who wandered in circles until exhaustion took them, until they simply lay down in the grass and never got up again. Eliza refused to be one of those women. She pushed herself to her knees, then to her feet. The wind hit her like a physical thing, trying to shove her back down. She wrapped her arms around herself and started walking, though she had no idea where she was going. The landscape was featureless in the storm, just endless rolling prairie and rain so thick she could barely see 10 feet ahead. Her stepfather would be looking for her by now. Thomas Garrett didn't like it when his possessions escaped. That's what she'd become in the 6 months since her mother's death, a possession. An asset to be managed, controlled, and eventually sold to the highest bidder. Or in this case, to Walter Brennan, a cattle baron twice her age with hands like slabs of meat and breath that smelled of whiskey and rotting teeth. The marriage had been arranged, the contract signed, the date set for next month. Eliza had tried to be good, tried to be obedient, tried to convince herself that marriage to Brennan might not be so terrible, that at least she'd have a home, security, a position in society. But then she'd found her mother's letters, hidden in a box beneath a loose floorboard in what had been her parents' bedroom. Letters her mother had written, but never sent, dated in the weeks before her death. Letters that spoke of feeling ill, of suspicions, of Thomas's strange insistence that she take her medicine, his anger when she refused. "I fear my husband means me harm," one letter read. "If something happens to me, please God, protect my Eliza." The doctor had said it was her heart, a sudden failure, tragic but natural in a woman of her age. But Margaret Moore had been only 42, healthy and strong, and she'd been sick for less than a week before she died. Eliza had confronted Thomas 3 days ago. She'd been stupid, reckless with grief and rage. She'd waved the letters in his face and called him a murderer. He'd struck her hard enough to split her lip, then locked her in her room. Through the door, he'd told her the wedding to Brennan would happen as planned, that she would behave, or he would make sure she regretted it, that nobody would believe the hysterical accusations of a grief-stricken girl. So Eliza had run. Lightning flashed again, and in that brief moment of illumination, Eliza saw it. A structure, maybe 100 yards ahead. A cabin, small and dark, but solid. Real. Hope surged through her exhausted body. She stumbled forward, her boots sinking in the mud with every step, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The wind tried to push her sideways. Rain pelted her face like tiny stones. But she kept moving, kept her eyes fixed on where she'd seen the cabin. Another flash of lightning confirmed it was still there. Still real, not some cruel hallucination. She could see a porch now, a hitching post, a window with a faint glow behind it. Someone was home. Fear and hope warred in her chest. A stranger might help her, or a stranger might send her back to Thomas, might believe his lies, might think she was just a foolish girl running from a perfectly reasonable marriage arrangement. But she was going to freeze to death if she stayed outside. Eliza climbed the 2 steps to the porch, her legs shaking so badly she nearly fell. She raised her hand to knock, but the door opened before her knuckles touched wood. A man stood in the doorway, backlit by the warm glow of a fire. Tall, well over 6 feet. Broad shoulders beneath a worn cotton shirt. Dark hair, dark eyes, a face that looked like it had been carved from stone and weathered by hard years. And he was staring at her like she was a ghost. "Please," Eliza managed, her voice barely audible over the storm. "Please, I need help." For a moment, the man didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there, one hand on the doorframe, his eyes moving over her in a way that made Eliza's skin crawl. Not with desire, she knew that look, had seen it in Walter Brennan's eyes, but with something else. Assessment, calculation. Then he stepped back, opening the door wider. "Get inside." It wasn't an invitation, it was an order. But it was also exactly what Eliza needed, so she obeyed, stumbling over the threshold into warmth and light. The cabin was small, maybe 20 feet square, with a stone fireplace against one wall and a narrow bed against another. A table, 2 chairs, shelves holding tin plates and cups. Clean but sparse. The home of a man who owned little and needed less. Eliza stood dripping on the rough wooden floor, her whole body shaking. Now that she'd stopped moving, the cold seemed to sink deeper into her bones. Her teeth chattered so hard she bit her tongue. The man closed the door, shutting out the storm. In the firelight, Eliza could see him more clearly. He was maybe 30, give or take a few years. His face was hard, angular, with the kind of tan that came from years working outside. A scar ran along his jawline, pale against his skin. His eyes were the color of dark honey, and they were fixed on her with an intensity that made her want to run back out into the storm. "You're hurt," he said, his voice low and rough. Eliza touched her face and felt the split in her lip from where Thomas had hit her. There was probably a bruise forming on her cheek, too. "It's nothing." "That's not nothing." He moved toward her, and Eliza's body reacted before her mind caught up. She jerked backward, her hands coming up defensively, and immediately lost her balance on her shaking legs. She would have fallen if the wall hadn't been there to catch her. The man stopped mid-step, froze completely, like he'd walked into an invisible wall. And in that moment, with him looming over her and nowhere to run and 6 months of fear and grief and rage boiling over, Eliza felt something inside her break. A sound came out of her throat, half sob and half gasp, and the words followed before she could stop them. "I'm afraid of you." She said it quietly, a whisper. But in the small cabin, with only the crackle of the fire and the drum of rain on the roof, the words seemed to echo. The man's expression didn't change. He didn't look offended or angry or sympathetic. He simply stood there for another heartbeat, looking at her with those unreadable eyes. Then he stepped back, deliberately, slowly, putting distance between them. "Then I'll earn your trust," he said. Eliza stared at him, not understanding. Men didn't say things like that. Men took what they wanted and made excuses later. Men demanded and expected and punished when they didn't get their way. But this man just turned away from her, moved to the fireplace, and picked up a blanket that had been draped over one of the chairs. He held it out to her, his arm extended, his body angled so she'd have a clear path to the door if she wanted it. "You're freezing," he said. Take this. I'll put more wood on the fire. Eliza's hands shook as she reached for the blanket. She half expected him to grab her when she got close enough, but he simply released the wool fabric and moved away, crouching by the fireplace to add logs from a stack beside the hearth. She wrapped the blanket around herself, and the warmth was so immediate and overwhelming that she nearly started crying again. She clamped down on the urge. She'd already shown this stranger far too much weakness. "What's your name?" the man asked, his back still to her as he tended the fire. Eliza hesitated. But what did it matter now? Eliza Moore. "I'm Caleb Hayes." He stood, brushing bark from his hands, but still didn't turn to face her fully. "You want to tell me why you're running through a storm at night, or should I guess?" The directness of the question threw her. I'm not. You're muddy from the knees down and soaked through. Your horse is gone. I'm guessing it threw you. You've got a fresh split lip and what's going to be a hell of a bruise on your face. And you're scared." He finally turned to look at her, and there was something in his eyes that looked almost like understanding. People don't ride into storms alone unless they're running from something worse. Eliza pulled the blanket tighter. "If I tell you, will you send me back?" "To what?" "To him. To my stepfather. To—" She couldn't finish the sentence. The words got stuck in her throat, tangled with all the fear and shame and helpless rage. Caleb studied her for a long moment. Then he shook his head. "No. No? I don't send women back to men who hit them." He said it simply, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. "You need a place to stay tonight. You've got one. After that, it's your choice where you go." Eliza felt something loosen in her chest. Not trust, not yet, but maybe the first fragile thread of hope. "I don't have any money. I can't pay you." "Didn't ask you to." Caleb moved to the table and picked up a tin cup. He filled it with water from a pitcher and held it out to her, this time not approaching, just setting it on the edge of the table where she could reach it. "You should drink something. You're dehydrated." She was. Her mouth was dry, her lips cracked. She edged forward, keeping the blanket wrapped around her, and took the cup. The water was cool and clean, and she drank it all in 3 long swallows. "There's stew," Caleb said, gesturing to a pot hanging over the fire. "It's not fancy, but it's hot. You hungry?" Eliza realized she was starving. She hadn't eaten since yesterday morning, too nervous and sick with fear to keep anything down. "Yes, thank you." Caleb ladled stew into a bowl and set it on the table beside the water cup. Then, deliberately, he moved to the far side of the cabin and sat on the edge of his bed, putting the maximum possible distance between them in the small space. "Eat," he said. "Then you can sleep. I'll take the floor." "You don't have to—" "Yes, I do." His voice was firm but not unkind. "You said you're afraid of me. That means I sleep on the floor where you can see me. And the door stays unlocked so you can leave if you need to. Those are the rules." Eliza stared at him. "You're giving me rules to make me feel safe?" Something that might have been a smile flickered across Caleb's face, there and gone so fast she almost missed it. "That's generally how trust works. I do what I say I'm going to do. You watch and decide if you believe me." It was such a foreign concept that Eliza didn't know how to respond, so she didn't. She just sat at the table and ate the stew, which was thick with venison and root vegetables and tasted better than anything she'd eaten in months. Outside, the storm raged on. Thunder rolled across the prairie. Rain hammered the roof. Lightning flashed through the small window, illuminating the cabin in brief, stark moments. But inside, by the fire, Eliza felt the first real warmth she'd known since her mother died. Caleb didn't speak, didn't ask questions, didn't stare at her or make demands. He just sat on his bed, cleaning his rifle with methodical care, giving her space to eat and breathe and exist, without fear for the first time in half a year. When Eliza finished the stew, she set the bowl aside and pulled the blanket tighter. Her clothes were still damp, clinging to her skin uncomfortably, but she didn't dare ask to change. Didn't know how to navigate this strange situation where a man was being kind without expecting something in return. "You should try to sleep," Caleb said quietly. He stood and pulled a bedroll from beneath the bed, spreading it on the floor near the fireplace. You can take the bed. It's not much, but it's dry. Where will you sleep? Eliza asked, though he'd already told her. Right here. Caleb settled onto the bedroll, lying on his back with his rifle within easy reach. I'm a light sleeper, so if you need anything, water, more wood on the fire, anything, just say so. I'll hear you. That should have frightened her. The idea of a strange man, armed, listening to her every movement through the night, but somehow it didn't. Maybe because he'd positioned himself between her and the door. Maybe because he was looking at the ceiling, not at her. Maybe because everything about his posture suggested he was trying to make himself as non-threatening as possible. Why are you helping me? Eliza whispered. Caleb was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. Then, because someone should have helped my sister. The words hung in the air, heavy with old pain. Eliza wanted to ask what had happened, but the look on Caleb's face, distant, haunted, told her it wasn't a story he was ready to share. I'm sorry, she said instead. Get some sleep, Eliza. Caleb's voice was gentle. You're safe here. I give you my word. Eliza moved to the bed, still wrapped in the blanket. The mattress was thin but clean, stuffed with straw that rustled when she lay down. She didn't take off her damp clothes, didn't let her guard down completely, but she closed her eyes and listened to the storm and the crackle of the fire and Caleb's steady breathing. And for the first time in 6 months, Eliza Moore slept without nightmares. What? She woke to pale gray light filtering through the window and the smell of coffee. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. Then memory rushed back. The storm, the flight, the cabin, the stranger who'd promised to earn her trust. Eliza sat up carefully, her body aching from yesterday's ride and fall. The cabin was warm, the fire still burning. Caleb was at the table pouring coffee into 2 tin cups. He glanced at her when she moved but didn't approach. Morning, he said. Storm passed about an hour ago. Coffee's hot if you want some. Eliza stood, still wrapped in the blanket, and moved to the table. She sat and accepted the cup he slid across to her, careful not to let their hands touch. The coffee was strong and bitter and exactly what she needed. She drank it gratefully, letting the heat seep into her still cold bones. Your horse came back, Caleb said, looking out the window. Found him grazing about 50 yards from here this morning. Looks like he threw a shoe, but otherwise he's fine. Relief flooded through her. Thomas's horse, he'll want it back. Thomas your stepfather? Eliza nodded. He the one who hit you? Another nod. Eliza's hand went unconsciously to her lip, which was swollen and tender. Caleb's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed calm. You planning to go back to him? No. The word came out fierce, sharp. Never. Where were you headed when the storm hit? Redstone Fort. I have a friend there, Mrs. Whitfield. She knew my mother. I hoped she might help me. Caleb considered this, sipping his coffee. Redstone Fort's a 3-day ride from here, maybe 4 depending on the terrain. You know the way? Eliza shook her head, shame heating her cheeks. She'd run without a plan, without supplies, without even a clear idea of where she was going, just desperation and hope. Can't let you ride out alone, Caleb said. Territory's rough between here and the fort. Bandits, wildlife, rough country, a woman alone, He trailed off, but the implication was clear. I can't ask you to escort me. You're not asking, I'm offering. Caleb met her eyes, and his expression was serious. I do route riding between settlements. It's how I make my living. Redstone Fort's on my usual circuit anyway. I was planning to head out in a few days. We can leave tomorrow if you're able to ride. Eliza's first instinct was to refuse. She'd learned not to accept help from men. But what choice did she have? She had no money, no supplies, and no idea how to survive 3 days alone on the prairie. And Caleb Hayes had kept his word so far, had slept on the floor, had given her space, had made her feel as safe as she was capable of feeling. If I'm traveling with you, she said carefully, I need to know, what do you expect from me? Caleb's expression didn't change. I expect you to follow instructions when it comes to staying alive. I expect you to tell me if you need to rest or if you're hurt, and I expect you to keep your word if you give it. That's all? That's all. He paused. I'm not looking for company, Eliza. I'm not looking for gratitude or payment or anything else. I'm just a man who can get you where you need to go safely. After that, we part ways and you live your life however you see fit." It sounded too good to be true, but the alternative was staying here or trying to make it alone, and neither of those options ended well. "All right," Eliza said quietly. "I accept your help, and I give you my word I'll do what you say when it comes to staying safe." Caleb nodded once, like they'd just sealed a business arrangement, which Eliza supposed they had. "We'll leave at first light tomorrow," he said. "That gives you today to rest and me time to check the supplies. Your stepfather know where you were headed?" "I don't think so. I didn't tell anyone." "He'll still look. Men like that don't like losing control." Caleb stood and moved to the window, looking out across the prairie. "We'll take the long route, avoid the main trails. It'll add a day to the trip, but it's safer." "Caleb?" Eliza set down her coffee cup. "Why did you say that about your sister?" His shoulders tensed. For a moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Her name was Sarah. She married young, to a man who seemed decent enough. Turned out he had a temper. She wrote me letters telling me things were hard, but that she was managing. I was fighting in the war, couldn't get home. By the time I did—" He stopped, his voice rough. "By the time I did, she was dead. Official story was she fell down the stairs. But I saw the bruises, saw the fear in the eyes of the neighbors who wouldn't look at me." Eliza's throat tightened. "I'm so sorry." "I made a promise at her grave," Caleb continued, still looking out the window, "that I'd never ignore a woman who needed help. Never look the other way when I saw something wrong. Never be the kind of man who lets fear and silence protect monsters." He finally turned to face her. "So when you showed up at my door, beaten and terrified, there was never a question of whether I'd help you. The only question was how." Tears stung Eliza's eyes. She blinked them away, refusing to cry. "Thank you," she whispered, "for keeping your promise." Caleb's expression softened slightly. "Get some rest today. Tomorrow's going to be a hard ride, and you're going to need your strength." Eliza spent the day in a strange limbo of fear and relief. Fear because Thomas was surely looking for her, because danger still lurked in every shadow. Relief because for the first time since her mother's death, she wasn't alone. Caleb moved around the cabin with quiet efficiency, checking supplies, cleaning weapons, preparing for their journey. He spoke little but never made her feel uncomfortable with his silence. He cooked a simple lunch of beans and cornbread, giving her the larger portion without comment. He fixed Thomas's horse's shoe, working in the small corral behind the cabin while Eliza watched from the window. Everything he did with calm competence. No wasted motion, no drama, just a man doing what needed to be done. As the sun began to set, painting the prairie in shades of gold and amber, Eliza found herself standing at the window, looking out at the vast emptiness. Somewhere out there, Thomas was searching. Somewhere out there, her old life was crumbling. But here, in this small cabin with this quiet, scarred man, Eliza felt something she'd thought she'd lost forever. She felt hope. "Eliza," Caleb said from behind her. "Question." She turned. He was standing by the table, his expression serious. "If your stepfather catches up to us on the road," he said, "what do you want me to do?" The question was so direct, so practical, that it took her a moment to process it. I don't know. I don't want violence, but I won't go back. I can't." "Then we're clear on that. But I need to know, are you prepared to stand your ground? Because if he finds us, there's going to be a confrontation, and you're going to have to decide what your freedom is worth." Eliza met his eyes, and in that moment she felt something shift inside her, a hardening, a resolve. "I'll stand my ground," she said, "whatever it takes." Caleb nodded slowly. "Then we'll be ready." That night, Eliza lay in Caleb's bed again while he took the floor. But this time, as she listened to the night sounds of the prairie and the steady rhythm of his breathing, she didn't feel afraid. She felt ready. Ready to fight for her freedom. Ready to believe that maybe, just maybe, there were still good men in the world. Ready to trust, even if it terrified her. And tomorrow, she would take the first step toward becoming the woman her mother had wanted her to be. Strong, brave, and free. The cowboy who'd promised to earn her trust was already keeping his word. Now it was her turn to find the courage to accept it. Dawn broke cold and clear, the sky washed clean by the storm. Eliza woke to find Caleb already moving about the cabin, his saddlebags laid out on the table, supplies organized with military precision. He'd prepared coffee again, and the smell of it mixed with wood smoke and leather created an oddly comforting combination. "We leave in an hour," he said without preamble. "Eat something first. It'll be a long day." Eliza nodded, wrapping the blanket around her shoulders as she moved to the table. Her dress had dried overnight but was stiff with mud and rain damage. She felt grimy, unkempt, aware of how she must look to him. But if Caleb noticed or cared, he gave no sign. He'd set out cornbread and dried meat. Simple fare, but more than she'd expected. She ate slowly, watching him work. Every movement was economical, purposeful. He checked his rifle, counting ammunition, rolled a bedroll tight and secured it with leather straps, filled canteens with water from a barrel outside. "The horse Thomas owned," Caleb said as he worked, "is a decent animal. Strong legs, good wind. You comfortable riding him?" "I'm not a very good rider," Eliza admitted. "My mother didn't think it was necessary for ladies to—" "You'll learn." Caleb's tone wasn't unkind, just matter of fact. "Out here, it's necessary. I'll teach you what you need to know." "What about your horse?" "Smoke's in the corral. 8-year-old gelding, steady as they come. He's carried me through worse than a 3-day ride to Redstone Fort." Caleb glanced at her. "You ever fire a gun?" The question startled her. "No, never." "That'll be your second lesson then, after riding." He pulled a small revolver from his pack, checked the chamber, then wrapped it in cloth. "Territory between here and the fort can be rough. You need to know how to protect yourself." Fear flickered in Eliza's chest. "Are we likely to run into trouble?" "Hope not, but hope's not a strategy." Caleb met her eyes. "I won't lie to you, Eliza. There are dangers out there. Bandits who prey on travelers. Men who wouldn't think twice about hurting a woman. And there's your stepfather, who'll be looking. So we prepare for the worst and pray for the best." It was the first time he'd mentioned anything close to prayer, and even then it was just an expression. Eliza appreciated that. She'd had enough of people telling her to pray, to trust in divine providence, to accept her fate as part of some greater plan. "I understand," she said quietly. "And I meant what I said. I won't go back. Whatever it takes." Something flickered in Caleb's expression. Approval, maybe, or recognition of shared resolve. "Then finish eating. We've got ground to cover." 20 minutes later, Eliza stood in the corral, facing Thomas's gelding with a mixture of trepidation and determination. The horse was tall, dark brown with a white blaze down his face. He huffed at her, ears forward, curious. "His name's Ranger," Caleb said from behind her. He'd saddled both horses while she'd washed her face and hands with cold water from the pump. "Thomas bred him, apparently. Horse is solid, well-trained, better than his owner deserved." Eliza reached out tentatively, touching Ranger's neck. The horse's coat was warm, smooth under her palm. "Hello, Ranger," she murmured. "I'm sorry I took you away from your stable." "Don't apologize to a horse for saving your own life." Caleb moved beside her, not touching her, but close enough that she could feel his presence. "Now, mounting. Left foot in the stirrup, hands on the pommel and cantle. Pull yourself up and swing your right leg over. Don't overthink it." Easier said than done. Eliza's first attempt ended with her hopping on one foot, unable to get enough height. Her second try got her halfway up before her arms gave out. Frustration burned in her throat. "You're fighting it," Caleb observed. "Use your momentum. One smooth motion, not 3 separate ones." On her third attempt, she made it into the saddle, though ungracefully. Ranger shifted beneath her, and Eliza grabbed the pommel, suddenly very aware of how far the ground was. "Good," Caleb said. "Now, reins, gentle pressure. Think of it as asking, not demanding. Horse responds better to requests than orders, kind of like people." He spent the next 15 minutes teaching her the basics: how to sit, how to hold the reins, how to signal the horse with subtle shifts of her weight and pressure from her legs. Eliza was acutely aware of his presence beside her, walking alongside Ranger as she practiced moving around the corral, but he never once touched her unnecessarily. When he adjusted her grip on the reins, he did it by demonstrating on his own hands first, then waiting for her to copy him. You're a natural teacher, she said during a brief rest. Caleb shrugged. Had to train new recruits during the war. You learn to explain things clearly when men's lives depend on it. You were an officer? Sergeant. Not high enough to make policy, high enough to keep my men alive. He checked the sun's position. We need to move. You comfortable enough to ride? Eliza's legs already ached, and she suspected she'd be covered in bruises by nightfall, but she nodded. I'm ready. Then let's go. Caleb mounted Smoke with easy grace, settling into the saddle like he was born there. He nudged the horse forward, and Ranger naturally followed, much to Eliza's relief. She gripped the pommel as they left the corral and headed out onto the open prairie. The landscape stretched endlessly in all directions, rolling grassland dotted with occasional stands of cottonwood trees. The sky was enormous, a perfect blue dome overhead. Eliza had lived in Nebraska her whole life, but always in towns or on settled ranches. She'd never been out in the true wilderness like this, and the vastness of it was both terrifying and exhilarating. They rode in silence for the first hour. Caleb set a steady pace, not too fast, but not leisurely either. He kept glancing around, reading the landscape in ways Eliza couldn't begin to understand. Every so often, he'd shift their direction slightly, guiding them around gullies or toward easier terrain. You said you do route riding, Eliza ventured when the silence began to feel heavy. What exactly does that mean? I carry mail and messages between settlements, Caleb explained. Small packages sometimes. News. I know the territory better than most, and I don't mind being alone for long stretches. He gestured at the empty prairie. Most people can't handle the isolation. Drives them a little crazy. But not you. I prefer it. After the war, cities felt too crowded. Too many people, too much noise. Out here, things are simple, clear. Eliza considered this. Don't you get lonely? Lonely and alone aren't the same thing. Caleb's voice was thoughtful. I was surrounded by men during the war, hundreds of them, thousands sometimes. Never felt more isolated in my life. Everyone scared, everyone dying, everyone pretending they weren't both. Out here, I'm alone by choice. That's different. She understood that more than he probably realized. She'd been surrounded by people in Thomas's house, servants, visitors, Thomas himself, but she'd never felt more alone than in those months after her mother's death. What about you? Caleb asked. What did you do before all this? Nothing important, Eliza said automatically, then caught herself. That was what Thomas had always told her, that her interests were trivial, her opinions worthless. Actually, that's not true. I read, a lot. My mother had a library, small but well chosen. I read everything I could get my hands on. Literature, history, even some philosophy. That's not nothing. Thomas thought it was. He said reading gave me dangerous ideas, made me think I was better than I was. Caleb's jaw tightened. Man was afraid of you being educated. That tell you something about his character. They rode on. The sun climbed higher, warming the air. Eliza's body ached from the unfamiliar motion of riding, but she didn't complain. She'd asked for this, asked to escape. She could handle some physical discomfort. Around midday, Caleb called a halt near a stream. He dismounted and helped the horses drink, then filled their canteens while Eliza carefully climbed down from Ranger's back. Her legs nearly buckled when they hit the ground. Muscles will adjust in a day or two, Caleb said, noticing her stiffness. Walk around a bit. Helps. Eliza forced herself to move, stretching her legs while Caleb pulled dried meat and hardtack from his saddlebags. They ate standing up, and Eliza realized this was his normal routine. No fuss, no wasted time. Everything in service of covering distance. How far have we come? She asked. Maybe 12 miles. We'll do another 15 before dark if the weather holds. 27 miles in a single day. Eliza had never traveled so far in her life. And we can make it to Redstone Fort in 3 days at this pace? 4, the way we're going. We're avoiding the main trail, remember? Adds distance but keeps us away from places your stepfather might look. The reminder sent a chill through her. Do you really think he's following? I think he's trying. Caleb's eyes scanned the horizon. But the storm washed out a lot of tracks, and he doesn't know this territory like I do. We've got advantages. What happens if he finds us anyway? Caleb was quiet for a moment, chewing on a piece of dried meat. When he spoke, his voice was calm but firm. Then we deal with it. But Eliza, I need you to understand something. I won't let him take you, not if you don't want to go. But that means there might be confrontation, violence even. You need to be prepared for that possibility. Eliza swallowed hard. I've never seen real violence. Not like you mean. Hope you don't have to. He repacked the saddlebags. But hope's not a strategy. You said that already. Eliza managed a weak smile. You always this practical? Kept me alive this long. Caleb handed her one of the canteens. Drink. You're sweating more than you realize. She obeyed, grateful for the cool water. When she handed the canteen back, their fingers briefly touched, and Caleb immediately pulled away, creating distance again. The gesture was so automatic, so clearly habitual, that Eliza realized he wasn't just being respectful. He was actively managing the space between them, constantly aware of boundaries. Caleb, she said quietly, I know I said I was afraid of you, but you don't have to treat me like I'm going to break. Not treating you like you'll break. Treating you like you deserve respect. He met her eyes. There's a difference. They mounted up again and continued riding. The afternoon stretched long and warm, the landscape gradually changing from flat prairie to rolling hills. Caleb pointed out landmarks, a distinctive rock formation, a lightning-struck tree, a dry creek bed. You memorize all this? Eliza asked. Have to. No maps for most of this territory. You learn the land or you get lost. He gestured to the west. See those hills? They'll turn into badlands if you go far enough. Dangerous country. We're skirting the edge. Have you ever gotten lost? Once. My second year doing route work. Ended up 20 miles off course in a dust storm. Took me 3 days to find my way back to a settlement. He paused. Learned my lesson. Now I always know where I am. There was something about the way he said it that made Eliza think he wasn't just talking about geography. Caleb Hayes was a man who'd decided never to be lost again, in any sense of the word. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Caleb started looking for a place to camp. He chose a spot in a small hollow, sheltered by a stand of cottonwoods, with good sightlines in all directions. We'll camp cold tonight, he said as they dismounted. No fire. Don't want to signal our location. Won't we freeze? I brought extra blankets. We'll manage. He began unsaddling the horses. You know how to make a bedroll? Eliza shook her head, embarrassed by her own uselessness. I'll show you. And he did, patiently demonstrating how to spread the blankets, how to create a buffer against the cold ground, how to position everything for maximum warmth. You'll sleep here, he said, indicating a spot near a large tree. I'll be there. He pointed to a position about 15 feet away, positioned so he'd be between her and any approach from the open prairie. They ate another cold meal as darkness fell. The stars came out, more than Eliza had ever seen, a brilliant carpet of light across the black sky. She sat on her bedroll, wrapped in a blanket, staring upward in wonder. You can see the whole universe out here, she murmured. Caleb, sitting on his own bedroll with his rifle across his knees, glanced up. One of the benefits of isolation. No city lights to block the view. Did you see skies like this during the war? Sometimes, between battles, when things were quiet. His voice went distant. We'd lie on our backs in camp, looking up, trying to remember there was something bigger than the blood and the death. Something that would still be there when we were gone. Is that comforting or terrifying? Both. He looked at her across the darkness between them. You tired? Exhausted. But my mind won't stop. Fear will do that, keeps you wired, alert, good for survival, bad for rest. He paused. You want to talk about it? Eliza pulled the blanket tighter. About what? Whatever's keeping you awake. She was quiet for a long moment, listening to the night sounds, wind in the grass, the horses shifting, some distant animal call. I keep thinking about my mother, she finally said. About what she must have felt those last days. Knowing something was wrong but not being able to prove it, being trapped with a man who was killing her. She tried to protect you, those letters you found. I know, but I feel like I failed her, like I should have seen what was happening, should have stopped it somehow. You were a daughter, not a detective. Caleb's voice was gentle but firm. And from what you've said, your stepfather was careful, skilled at hiding what he was doing. You can't blame yourself for his evil. But if I just paid more attention, then what? He would have killed you too? Caleb leaned forward slightly. Eliza, listen to me. Surviving isn't a betrayal. Your mother wanted you to live. That's why she hid those letters, why she tried to leave you evidence. She was giving you a chance to escape. Don't waste it on guilt. Tears stung Eliza's eyes. How do you know what to say? I don't. I'm just saying what I wish someone had said to me after Sarah died. He was quiet for a moment. I carried guilt for years. Still do, sometimes. Guilt that I wasn't there, that I didn't come home sooner, that I believed her letters when she said she was fine. But eventually you have to choose, carry the guilt or carry the lesson. Can't do both and stay sane. What lesson did you learn? That silence protects monsters, that good intentions without action are worthless, that if you see something wrong, you stand up, even if it costs you. He adjusted his rifle. And that the people who survive aren't always the ones who are strongest or smartest. Sometimes they're just the ones who refuse to give up. Eliza wiped her eyes. Is that why you helped me? To honor your sister? Partly, but also because it's the right thing to do. Would have helped you even without Sarah's memory. He settled back against his saddle. Try to sleep, Eliza. Tomorrow's another long day. She lay down on her bedroll, the ground hard beneath her despite the blankets. The sky stretched above her, infinite and indifferent, but knowing Caleb was nearby, keeping watch, made the darkness less frightening. Caleb? She said quietly. Yeah? Thank you for everything. Get some rest. She closed her eyes and, despite everything, found herself drifting toward sleep. The last thing she heard was Caleb's voice, so quiet she almost missed it. You're doing fine, Eliza. Better than fine. And in that moment, wrapped in borrowed blankets under a stranger's protection, Eliza Moore felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. She felt like maybe she was going to be all right. The second day of riding brought new challenges. Eliza woke stiff and sore, every muscle in her body protesting. Caleb, already awake and checking the horses, took one look at her awkward movements and pulled a small tin from his saddlebag. Liniment, he said, tossing it to her. For the muscles. Rub it on before we ride. Helps. The salve smelled terrible, but worked wonders. By the time they set out, Eliza could move without wincing quite so much. They rode through changing terrain, hills giving way to rockier ground, the grass shorter and sparser. Caleb maintained their steady pace, still avoiding main trails, still constantly scanning their surroundings. Around mid-morning, he suddenly held up a hand, signaling her to stop. Eliza pulled Ranger to a halt, her heart immediately racing. What is it? She whispered. Riders. 3 of them, maybe 2 miles east. He pointed, and Eliza squinted but couldn't see anything. They're paralleling our course. How can you possibly know that? Dust cloud, small, moving steady. He watched for another moment. Could be nothing. Could be trouble. We're going to change direction, head more north, see if they follow. They altered their path, and for the next hour, Caleb kept checking behind them. Finally, he relaxed slightly. They didn't follow. Probably just travelers on their own business. But you weren't sure. Never sure out here. That's why you stay alert. He glanced at her. You did good. Didn't panic, stayed quiet. That matters. The praise warmed her more than it probably should have. They stopped for their midday break near a rocky outcropping that provided shade. While the horses rested, Caleb pulled out the small revolver he'd mentioned earlier. Time for that second lesson, he said. Eliza eyed the gun nervously. Is this really necessary? Hope you never need it, but if you do, you'll be glad you know how. He demonstrated how to hold it, how to aim, how to squeeze the trigger rather than pull it. We're not wasting ammunition on practice shots, so you'll have to learn by doing if the time comes, but knowing the basics might save your life. He made her practice the grip, the stance, the motion of aiming. His hands guided hers when necessary, but always briefly, always with clear purpose, never lingering. You're a quick study, he observed. I'm motivated. Eliza sighted down the barrel at an imaginary target. I won't be helpless again. You were never helpless, trapped, yes. Helpless? No. Caleb took the gun back, wrapped it, and tucked it into her saddlebag. There's a difference. They rode on through the afternoon. Eliza found herself studying Caleb, this quiet man who'd become her unlikely protector. He moved through the world with such certainty, such competence. But there was also a loneliness to him, a distance he maintained not just from her, but from everything. "Can I ask you something personal?" she said during one of their brief walking breaks to rest the horses. Caleb glanced at her. "You can ask, can't promise I'll answer. After the war, after Sarah died, did you ever think about settling down? Having a family?" He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't respond. Then, "Once, met a woman in Kansas few years back, schoolteacher, smart, kind, patient with my rough edges." He paused. "But I couldn't do it, couldn't settle. The walls started closing in after a few months. I'd wake up in a cold sweat feeling trapped. Wasn't fair to her." "So you've been alone ever since?" "Alone works for me. No one gets hurt that way." "That sounds lonely." "Told you, lonely and alone aren't the same thing." But there was something in his voice that made Eliza think he was trying to convince himself as much as her. As the sun began to set on their second day, they made camp in another sheltered spot. This time Caleb allowed a small fire, reasoning that they were far enough from main routes and had seen no signs of pursuit. The warmth and light were welcome. Eliza sat close to the flames, grateful for the heat after the cold previous night. Caleb cooked beans and made coffee, and the simple meal tasted like a feast. "Tomorrow we'll reach Broken Creek," he said, studying a worn map by firelight. "Small settlement, maybe 50 people. We can resupply there, sleep in actual beds if you want." "What do you usually do?" "Camp outside. Cheaper. But you might prefer a real roof." Eliza considered. Part of her craved civilization, comfort, safety. But another part, the part that was learning to trust this quiet man, didn't want to change the pattern they'd established. "What would you recommend?" she asked. Honest answer, camp outside. Town small enough that news travels. Someone might remember us, might mention it if anyone comes asking questions. The less we're noticed, the better. "Then we camp." Caleb nodded approval. "You're adapting well. Most city people can't handle more than a day or two of rough travel." "I'm not city people anymore." Eliza stared into the fire. "I don't know what I am now." "You're someone who chose freedom over comfort. That's not nothing." They sat in companionable silence, the fire crackling between them. Eliza felt the distance that Caleb maintained, the careful 15 feet between their bedrolls, the way he never let conversation get too intimate, the invisible boundary he'd drawn around himself. But she also felt safe, protected, respected. And slowly, carefully, she felt the first fragile threads of trust beginning to weave themselves around her heart. "Caleb?" she said as they prepared to sleep. "Yeah?" "Your sister. Do you think she'd be proud of you for keeping your promise?" He was quiet for a long moment. "I hope so. It's all I've got to give her now." Eliza lay down, pulling the blankets close. The fire burned low, casting dancing shadows. Above them the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns. And between them, in the careful distance Caleb maintained, Eliza felt something growing. Not romance, not yet, maybe not ever, but something equally powerful. The recognition of two wounded people choosing to be decent to each other in an indecent world. It was enough. For now, it was more than enough. The morning of their third day broke with an uneasy stillness. Eliza felt it before she opened her eyes. Something different in the air, a tension that hadn't been there before. When she sat up, she found Caleb already awake, standing at the edge of their camp with his rifle in hand, staring back the way they'd come. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice still rough with sleep. "Maybe nothing." But his jaw was tight, his shoulders tense. "Maybe something. Get ready to ride. Fast." Eliza's heart kicked into a higher rhythm. She scrambled out of her bedroll, rolling it with shaking hands. The simple tasks Caleb had taught her, saddling Ranger, securing her supplies, suddenly felt clumsy and slow. She could feel panic rising in her throat. "Breathe," Caleb said without turning around. "Panic makes you stupid. Breathe and focus." She forced herself to slow down, to do things right rather than fast. By the time she had Ranger saddled, Caleb had already packed his own gear and was studying the horizon with his hand shading his eyes. "What do you see?" Eliza moved beside him, following his gaze. "Dust. 3 riders, same as 2 days ago, but this time they're not paralleling us." His voice was grim. "They're coming straight at us. Been tracking us, probably. Waited until we were far enough from any settlement that nobody would hear if there was trouble." "Is it Thomas?" "Don't know yet, but we're not waiting to find out." Caleb turned to her, and his eyes were hard. "Listen carefully. We're going to ride hard for about an hour, try to put distance between us and them. There's rough country ahead, ravines, broken ground. If we can reach it before they catch up, we might lose them in the terrain. And if we can't, then we make a stand." He gripped her shoulder briefly, the first time he'd initiated physical contact, and the weight of his hand was steadying. "But I need you to trust me completely. Can you do that?" Eliza met his eyes and found herself nodding. "Yes." "Then let's move." They mounted and rode, and this time there was nothing measured or careful about their pace. Caleb pushed Smoke hard, and Ranger kept up, sensing the urgency. The prairie flew past in a blur of grass and sky. Eliza's inexperience showed. She bounced in the saddle, struggling to find the rhythm, her hands aching from gripping the reins so tightly. But she didn't complain, didn't ask to slow down. Fear was a sharp spur driving her forward. After what felt like both an eternity and no time at all, Caleb glanced back. His expression darkened. "They're gaining. Better horses, better riders." He scanned the landscape ahead, and Eliza saw what he was looking for. The land was beginning to break up, cut through with gullies and dry creek beds. "There. We head for that ravine system. It'll slow them down, give us options." They veered toward the broken ground, and within minutes the terrain changed dramatically. The flat prairie gave way to a maze of erosion cuts and rocky outcroppings. Caleb navigated it with the confidence of someone who'd studied this land, but even he had to slow down to keep the horses from breaking their legs in the treacherous footing. Behind them, the sound of pursuit grew louder. Voices now calling to each other, close enough that Eliza could make out words. "She went this way." "Don't lose the trail." "Garrett's paying good money. We're not going back empty-handed." Thomas had sent bounty hunters. The realization hit Eliza like a physical blow. Her stepfather hadn't come himself. He'd hired men to drag her back. Men who'd be motivated by money rather than any pretense of family duty. Caleb heard it too. He guided them deeper into the ravine system, the walls rising on either side, and then suddenly pulled Smoke to a halt in a wider section where the ravine split in 3 directions. "Off your horse," he said, his voice clipped and commanding. "Now!" Eliza obeyed, her legs nearly giving out when she hit the ground. Caleb dismounted in one smooth motion and grabbed both sets of reins, leading the horses to a narrow side cut barely wide enough for them to squeeze into. "Stay with them," he told Eliza. "Keep them quiet. I'm going to see who we're dealing with." "Caleb, trust me. Remember?" He pulled his rifle from its scabbard and moved to the edge of the wider area, positioning himself behind a large boulder that gave him a clear view of the approach while keeping him hidden. Eliza pressed herself against the ravine wall with the horses, one hand on Ranger's nose to keep him from whinnying. Her heart hammered so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. She could hear the riders now, close, their horses' hooves clattering on stone. Then they appeared. 3 men on horseback, rough-looking and heavily armed. The lead rider was a big man with a scarred face and a deputy's badge that looked like it had been stolen rather than earned. The other 2 were younger, lean and hungry-looking, the kind of men who'd do anything for the right price. They pulled up in the wider area, looking around in confusion at the 3 diverging paths. "Trail splits," the scarred man said. "Damn it!" "We need to split up," one of the younger men suggested. "Cover all 3. "Nobody moves." Caleb's voice rang out from behind the boulder, calm and clear. All 3 men froze, their hands moving toward their weapons. "I wouldn't," Caleb continued. "I've got a rifle aimed at your leader's chest, and from this distance, I don't miss. Your friends draw on me, you die. That clear enough?" The scarred man's face went red with anger, but he slowly raised his hands away from his gun belt. "Who the hell are you?" "Someone who doesn't appreciate being followed." Caleb stepped out from behind the boulder, rifle steady, his body positioned so he could see all three men while staying in partial cover. "You boys want to explain why you're tracking us?" "We're not tracking you," the scarred man said. "We're after the girl, Eliza Moore. She's a runaway, property of Thomas Garrett. He wants her back." "Property." Caleb's voice went flat, dangerous. "You just called a human being property." "You know what I mean. She's his stepdaughter, under his legal guardianship. He's got rights." "He's got a claim, maybe. Rights are something different." Caleb's grip on the rifle never wavered. "And here's the thing. I don't care about his claim. The girl says she doesn't want to go back. That's enough for me." One of the younger men spoke up, his voice nervous. "Look, mister, we don't want trouble. We're just doing a job. Garrett's paying us $50 each to bring her back. You let us have her. You can ride on. No harm done." $50? Caleb's laugh was cold. "You're selling her back to a man who beats her for $50. That sit right with you?" The young man shifted uncomfortably. "I got debts. We all got debts." "Don't make you a slaver." Caleb's eyes moved to the scarred man. "You're the leader. What's your name?" "Pike. John Pike." "Well, Pike, here's how this is going to work. You and your boys are going to turn around and ride back to wherever you came from. You're going to tell Thomas Garrett that you lost our trail, or that we were too well armed, or whatever story keeps you alive. But you're not taking Eliza Moore anywhere." Pike's face twisted into a sneer. "There's three of us, and one of you. You can't kill us all before one of us gets you." "Maybe not, but I'll definitely kill you first. You willing to die for $50? The standoff stretched, tension singing in the air like a plucked string. Eliza held her breath, one hand still on Ranger's nose, the other reaching slowly for the revolver in her saddlebag. She didn't know if she could actually shoot someone, but she'd be damned if she let Caleb face this alone. Then a new voice cut through the tension. "Actually, he's not alone." Eliza stepped out from the side cut, the revolver in her hand. It shook. She couldn't help that, but she held it pointed in the general direction of the three men. "I'm armed too, and I'll tell you something else. I'd rather die right here than go back to Thomas Garrett." "Eliza." Caleb's voice held a warning, but also something that might have been pride. "No." She moved to stand beside him, still keeping distance, but presenting a united front. "These men need to hear this from me. I'm not anyone's property. Thomas Garrett murdered my mother. Poisoned her over weeks while everyone thought it was her heart. I found the evidence. That's why he wants me back. Not because he cares about me, but because I can destroy him." Pike's expression flickered with something, doubt maybe, or calculation. "That's a serious accusation." "It's the truth. And if you take me back, you're not just collecting bounty money. You're complicit in murder." Eliza's voice strengthened. "Is that worth $50? The two younger men exchanged glances. One of them edged his horse back slightly. Pike noticed. "Hold your positions," he snapped. Then to Eliza. "You got proof of this murder?" "I have letters my mother wrote. I have dates and symptoms. I have enough to raise questions, at least. Enough to make Thomas Garrett very uncomfortable." Eliza lifted her chin. "And if I die out here, those letters go to the authorities anyway. I sent them to a friend before I ran. So killing me doesn't help Thomas at all." It was a lie, but a good one. Eliza saw it land, saw Pike's certainty waver. "This is getting complicated," one of the younger men muttered. "Shut up," Pike growled, but his hand had moved away from his gun, and Eliza knew they'd won a small victory. Caleb pressed the advantage. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to ride away. We're going to finish our journey to Redstone Fort, where Eliza has friends and can make her accusations formal. And you're going to tell Thomas Garrett that his stepdaughter is beyond his reach now. Clear?" "Garrett won't like it," Pike said. "Don't care what Garrett likes. Care about what's right." Caleb's voice was steel. "And if you three decide to follow us anyway, decide that $50 is worth more than your conscience. Remember this? I was a sergeant in the war. I've killed men in situations a lot more complicated than this. I won't hesitate to do it again to protect someone under my care." The ravine was silent except for the wind whistling through the rocks. Eliza's hand ached from gripping the revolver. She could see Pike weighing his options, doing the math on whether this was worth dying over. Finally, Pike spat into the dirt. This ain't over. Garrett's got reach. He'll find other ways to get to her. Maybe. But not through you. Not today. Caleb raised the rifle slightly. Now ride, and don't look back. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then one of the younger men turned his horse, and the spell broke. The second young man followed. Pike glared at Caleb and Eliza, his face promising future retribution, but he turned his horse too. You made powerful enemies today, he called back. Already had them, Caleb replied. Get moving. They watched the three riders disappear back the way they'd come, the sound of hoofbeats gradually fading. Even then, Caleb didn't lower his rifle. Stay alert, he murmured. Could be a trick. They could circle back. Eliza's hands were shaking so badly now that she nearly dropped the revolver. The adrenaline that had sustained her was draining away, leaving her weak and dizzy. Caleb noticed. Gently, he took the gun from her hands. You did good, he said quietly. Better than good. You stood your ground. I was terrified. Courage isn't not being afraid. It's being afraid and doing the right thing anyway. He checked the revolver, confirmed the safety, and tucked it back in her saddlebag. That took guts, stepping out like that. I couldn't let you face them alone. I know. Something in his expression softened. But next time, maybe wait for my signal before you reveal yourself? There's going to be a next time? Hope not, but hope's not a strategy, Eliza finished. Despite everything, she managed a weak smile. I'm learning. They stayed in the ravine for another 20 minutes, Caleb keeping watch while Eliza sat on a rock and tried to stop shaking. The horses sensed the tension had passed and relaxed, nosing at sparse grass growing between the stones. Finally, Caleb deemed it safe enough to move. We need to put serious distance between us and them, just in case. You up for hard riding? Eliza's body ached. Her hands were blistered from the reins. Her legs felt like they might give out, but she nodded. I'm up for whatever it takes. That's what I thought. They mounted and rode out of the ravine system, Caleb choosing a path that would be difficult to track. For the next 3 hours, they pushed hard, covering ground in a way that would make pursuit nearly impossible. Caleb used every trick he knew, riding through streams to hide their tracks, doubling back to confuse the trail, choosing rocky ground where hoofprints wouldn't show. By the time he finally called a halt, the sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon. They'd reached a high point of land that offered views in all directions. No dust clouds, no signs of pursuit. I think we lost them, Caleb said, scanning the landscape one more time. But we're not stopping long. We'll ride through dusk, make camp in full dark where we can't be seen. Eliza slid off Ranger's back and immediately collapsed. Her legs simply gave out, dumping her unceremoniously on the ground. She started laughing. She couldn't help it. Hysterical, exhausted laughter that verged on tears. Caleb dismounted and crouched beside her, not touching, but close. Hey, you're all right. You're safe. I know, I just... She wiped her eyes. I stood up to them. I actually stood up to them. You did. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just a victim. I fought back. Yes, you did. There was unmistakable pride in Caleb's voice. Your mother would be proud. The words broke something open in Eliza's chest. The tears came for real now, hard sobs that shook her whole body. All the fear and grief and rage she'd been carrying, all the months of silent suffering came pouring out. And Caleb, this careful, distant man who maintained his boundaries like they were fortress walls, did something unexpected. He sat down beside her, still not touching, still respecting her space, and simply stayed. Present, solid, a quiet witness to her pain. It's all right, he said softly. Let it out. You've earned it. So she did. She cried for her mother, poisoned and helpless. She cried for herself, trapped and afraid. She cried for the life she'd lost and the uncertain future ahead. She cried until she had nothing left, until the sobs turned to hiccups and then to silence. When she finally looked up, the sun was touching the horizon, painting the world in gold and amber. Caleb was still there, still waiting, patient as stone. Sorry, she managed. Don't be. Sometimes you need to fall apart before you can put yourself back together. He stood and offered her his hand, the first time he'd done that too. Come on, we've still got riding to do. Eliza took his hand and let him pull her to her feet. His grip was strong, calloused, warm, safe. Caleb? She said as he turned back to the horses. Yeah? Thank you for stepping back that first night, for earning my trust instead of demanding it, for being exactly who you are. He looked at her for a long moment and something passed between them. An understanding, a recognition of what was growing in the careful space he'd maintained. You're welcome, he said simply. Then, softer, and thank you for trusting me anyway. They rode on as dusk fell, putting more distance between themselves and Thomas Garrett's hired hunters. The land grew darker, the stars emerging one by one overhead. And somewhere in that darkness, in the rhythm of hoofbeats and the creak of leather, Eliza felt something shift. She'd been running from her old life. Now, for the first time, she felt like she might be running towards something new, something better, something chosen rather than forced upon her. The fear was still there. It would probably always be there, a shadow at the edge of her thoughts. But it no longer controlled her. She'd stood her ground. She'd chosen her own path, and she had someone riding beside her who respected that choice. It was enough. They made camp in full darkness, as Caleb had promised, in a small depression that would hide their presence from anyone searching. No fire again. Cold food eaten in silence. But the silence felt different now, companionable rather than careful. As Eliza settled into her bedroll, wrapped in blankets against the night chill, she looked across at Caleb's silhouette against the stars. How much farther to Redstone Fort? She asked. Day and a half, maybe. We'll push hard tomorrow. Get there by evening the day after. He paused. You'll be safe there. Your friend will help you, and the fort has law, real law. You can make your accusations formal, get protection. And then what? Then you start your new life, whatever that looks like. What about you? Caleb was quiet. I've got my routes to ride, people depending on messages getting through. It's what I do. So we just part ways? That was always the plan. Eliza heard what he wasn't saying, that getting close to people wasn't something he did, that his solitary life was as much fortress as the distance he maintained. But she also heard something else underneath, a hesitation, a question he wasn't asking. Plans change, she said softly. Sometimes. Caleb shifted in his bedroll. Get some sleep, Eliza. Tomorrow's going to be another hard day. But as Eliza closed her eyes, listening to the night sounds of the prairie, she thought about those 5 words that had changed everything. Then I'll earn your trust. And she realized he'd done exactly that. Through action, through patience, through consistent decency when she'd learned to expect cruelty. Caleb Hayes had earned her trust. Now the question was, what would they both do with it? The answer would have to wait. For now, there was sleep, and the promise of Redstone Fort ahead, and the knowledge that she was no longer running alone. The stars wheeled overhead, indifferent to human drama. The prairie wind whispered through the grass. And 2 people, one fleeing, one protecting, rested in the darkness, bound together by choice and circumstance, and the fragile beginning of something neither quite knew how to name. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. But tonight, they'd survived. And that was victory enough. Dawn came with a clarity that felt almost prophetic. Eliza woke to find the sky washed clean, the air crisp and cool, and Caleb already checking the horses with the methodical precision that had become familiar. But there was something different about him this morning, a tension in his shoulders, a grimness to his mouth. What is it? She asked, sitting up and pushing her hair from her face. We're close. Half-day's ride to Redstone Fort. He glanced at her. Once we get there, things are going to move fast. You ready for that? Eliza thought about the letters hidden in her bag, her mother's careful documentation of her own murder. She thought about Thomas Garrett's face when he'd locked her in her room, the cold certainty in his eyes that he would win. And she thought about the woman she'd been when she fled into that storm, terrified, helpless, trapped. She wasn't that woman anymore. I'm ready, she said. They rode hard through the morning, the landscape gradually changing from wild prairie to something more settled. Fences began to appear, marking property lines. They passed a homestead, then another, signs of civilization creeping back into their isolated world. Eliza found herself both relieved and strangely regretful. The past days had been terrifying, yes, but also clarifying. Out on the prairie with only Caleb and the horses, life had been simple. Now complexity was rushing back. Around midday, they crested a rise, and there it was. Redstone Fort sprawled in the valley below. It wasn't really a fort anymore, hadn't been for years. The original military structure had evolved into a thriving town of maybe 300 people, built around the old stockade walls. Eliza could see the main street, the church steeple, buildings made of timber and stone. Civilization, safety, the law. But also the end of this strange journey. The end of just her and Caleb against the world. "You all right?" Caleb asked, noticing her hesitation. "Yes, it's real now. All of it. It's been real the whole time. Now you've got witnesses." He pointed to a large house on the edge of town, well-maintained with a white picket fence. "That's the Whitfield place. Your mother's friend lives there?" "Yes, Mrs. Lenora Whitfield. She and my mother grew up together. They corresponded regularly until—" Eliza's throat tightened. "Until my mother died." "Then that's where we go first." Caleb started smoke down the slope toward town. "Stay close." They rode into Redstone Fort in the early afternoon, and Eliza was acutely aware of the eyes that followed them. A strange man and a disheveled young woman, both road-worn and dusty, leading horses that looked like they'd been ridden hard. People paused in their business to stare. Whispers followed them down the street. Caleb ignored all of it, his focus entirely on getting them to the Whitfield house. When they reached the white picket fence, he dismounted and waited for Eliza to do the same before tying both horses to the post. "You want me to come with you?" he asked. Eliza realized she did, desperately, but she also knew this was something she needed to face herself. "Wait here, please. I'll call if I need you." She walked up the path to the front door, her legs unsteady from days of riding. Before she could knock, the door opened and a woman appeared, mid-50s, silver-haired, with intelligent eyes and a kind face that reminded Eliza so much of her mother that tears sprang to her eyes. "Can I help you?" Mrs. Whitfield began, then stopped, her eyes widening. "Eliza? Eliza Moore, is that you?" "Hello, Mrs. Whitfield." Eliza's voice cracked. "I'm sorry to arrive like this. I didn't know where else to go." The older woman's expression shifted from surprise to concern in an instant. She looked past Eliza to where Caleb stood by the horses, then back. "Come inside. Both of you, quickly now." Caleb followed them in, and Mrs. Whitfield shut the door firmly behind them. The house was warm and clean, filled with the smell of bread baking and flowers from the garden. After days on the prairie, the domesticity of it nearly undid Eliza. "Sit, both of you. I'll make tea." Mrs. Whitfield bustled into the kitchen, but Eliza could see her stealing glances, taking in Eliza's bruised face, her worn clothing, the way she held herself. "You look like you've ridden through hell itself." "Close enough," Caleb said quietly. He'd removed his hat and stood near the door, clearly uncomfortable in such refined surroundings. Mrs. Whitfield returned with tea and studied them both with sharp eyes. "Eliza, child, what's happened? Last I heard, you were living with Thomas Garrett after your mother's passing. Why are you here, looking like you've been on the run?" Eliza set down her teacup with shaking hands. "Because I have been, Mrs. Whitfield, I need to tell you something about my mother's death. Something terrible." The older woman's face went pale. "Go on." So Eliza told her everything. The sudden illness, the doctor's diagnosis, the funeral she'd barely remember through her grief. Then the discovery of the letters, her mother's suspicions, the evidence she'd found, Thomas's rage when she'd confronted him, the locked room, the arranged marriage to Walter Brennan, her flight into the storm, and everything that had followed. Mrs. Whitfield listened without interrupting, her face growing harder with each revelation. When Eliza finished, there was a long silence. Then, "Margaret wrote to me," Mrs. Whitfield said quietly. 2 weeks before she died. She said she wasn't feeling well, that something wasn't right. She said if anything happened to her, I should look after you. Her eyes glittered with unshed tears. "I thought it was just worry. Your mother always was a worrier. But she knew, didn't she? She knew what Thomas was doing." "She tried to tell people," Eliza whispered, But who believes a sick woman accusing her husband? The doctor thought she was paranoid from fever. The doctor was a fool. Mrs. Whitfield stood abruptly, her teacup clattering. Do you have the letters? The evidence? Eliza pulled the small bundle from her bag, the papers worn from being carried close to her body. Mrs. Whitfield read them by the window light, her expression growing more grim with each page. This is enough, she said finally. This is more than enough to raise serious questions. Marshal Hendricks will want to see these. Will he believe me? Eliza asked. You're the daughter of my dearest friend, who was murdered by the man who was supposed to protect her. Mrs. Whitfield's voice was steel. And I'm a woman of standing in this community. Between your testimony and my support, Marshal Hendricks will listen. Thomas Garrett may have influence, but it doesn't extend this far. Caleb, who'd been silent through all of this, finally spoke. There's something else you should know. Garrett sent bounty hunters after Eliza. 3 men. We encountered them yesterday. Mrs. Whitfield's eyes sharpened. Did they hurt you? No, ma'am. Caleb stopped them. Eliza looked at him, at this quiet man who'd risked so much for a stranger. He kept me safe. Then I owe you a debt, Mr. Hayes, Caleb Hayes, and you don't owe me anything, just doing what's right. Nevertheless, Mrs. Whitfield studied him with an assessing gaze that reminded Eliza of her mother evaluating people. You're a good man, Mr. Hayes. That's rarer than it should be. Caleb looked uncomfortable with the praise. I should see to the horses. Nonsense. I'll have my man handle them. You both need rest, food, and proper beds. When was the last time either of you had a hot meal? Few days, Caleb admitted. Then it's settled. You'll stay here while we sort this mess out. I have plenty of room, and I won't hear any arguments. She fixed them both with a look that brooked no disagreement. Eliza, you'll take the guest room upstairs. Mr. Hayes, there's a room above the carriage house that's clean and private. After you've both bathed and eaten, we'll go see the marshal. Everything happened quickly after that. Mrs. Whitfield was a force of nature when she decided to be, organizing baths and clean clothes and food with brisk efficiency. Eliza found herself in a real bedroom for the first time in days, with a copper tub full of hot water and soap that smelled of lavender. She scrubbed days of prairie dust from her skin and washed her hair until it squeaked clean, watching the water turn brown with accumulated grime. When she emerged, wearing a borrowed dress that Mrs. Whitfield had laid out, simple but well made, in a soft blue that brought out her eyes, she felt almost human again. The bruise on her face was fading to yellow-green, and the split in her lip was nearly healed. She looked like a young woman who'd been through an ordeal, yes, but who'd survived it. Mrs. Whitfield was waiting downstairs with a meal that made Eliza's eyes water: roast chicken, potatoes, fresh bread, vegetables from the garden. After days of dried meat and hardtack, it was paradise. Caleb appeared shortly after, clean and wearing fresh clothes that Mrs. Whitfield had somehow procured. Without trail dust and stubble, he looked different, younger, more vulnerable somehow. But his eyes were the same, steady and calm. They ate together at Mrs. Whitfield's table, and the older woman asked Caleb about his work, his background, his family. He answered briefly, economically, but Eliza noticed he was more forthcoming than usual. Something about Mrs. Whitfield's direct kindness seemed to bypass his usual defenses. Your sister, Mrs. Whitfield said gently when Caleb mentioned Sarah in passing. What happened to her wasn't your fault. Caleb's hand tightened on his fork. I should have been there. You were at war, fighting for your country. You can't shoulder blame for evil done in your absence. She reached across the table and patted his hand briefly. But I understand the guilt. When my husband died, I spent years thinking of things I could have done differently. Eventually, you realize that guilt is just love with nowhere to go. The best you can do is honor them by living well. Caleb was quiet for a moment. Then, that's wise. That's survival. Mrs. Whitfield stood. Now, if you're both finished, we should visit Marshal Hendricks before the day gets away from us. The marshal's office was on the main street, a sturdy building with bars on the windows and a territorial flag hanging outside. Marshal Hendricks himself was a lean man in his late 40s with a weathered face and shrewd eyes. He listened to their story with growing intensity, reading Margaret's letters carefully, asking pointed questions. These are serious accusations, he said finally. Murder accusations against a man of property and standing. My mother was a woman of property and standing, Eliza said quietly, and she's dead because of him. Hendricks studied her, then Caleb, then Mrs. Whitfield. You believe her story, Lenora? I do. Margaret wrote to me about her concerns. I dismissed them as illness talking. Mrs. Whitfield's voice was firm. I won't make that mistake twice. And you, Mr. Hayes, what's your involvement here? I helped Miss Moore reach safety, Caleb said. Saw the fear in her eyes, the bruises on her face. Saw Garrett's men try to take her back. That's all the involvement I need. Hendricks nodded slowly. Here's what I can do. These letters establish suspicion. Combined with Miss Moore's testimony about her stepfather's behavior and the attempted forced marriage, I have grounds to send a wire to the territorial authorities. They'll want to investigate, possibly exhume the body for examination. How long will that take? Eliza asked. Weeks, maybe months. Justice moves slowly. Hendricks leaned back in his chair. But in the meantime, I can issue a protection order. If Thomas Garrett or anyone acting on his behalf comes within 10 miles of you, they'll be arrested, and I'll send a deputy to escort you if you need to travel. What about the bounty hunters? Caleb asked. If they show their faces in my jurisdiction, I'll have words with them about accepting contracts to kidnap young women. Hendricks' expression was grim. This territory is trying to become civilized. Men like that don't help. Relief flooded through Eliza so powerfully that she swayed in her chair. Mrs. Whitfield steadied her with a hand on her shoulder. Thank you, Marshal, Eliza managed. Don't thank me yet. We've got a long road ahead, and Garrett won't go down without a fight. Hendricks pulled out paper and began writing. But you're safe here, Miss Moore. That much I can guarantee. They left the marshal's office with the protection order in hand, and Eliza felt like she could breathe fully for the first time in months. The afternoon sun was warm on her face, and the street was full of normal people doing normal things, shopping, talking, going about their lives. It was all so ordinary, so beautifully ordinary. Come on, Mrs. Whitfield said. Let's get you both home. You've had enough excitement for one day. But as they walked back toward the house, a commotion erupted at the far end of the street. Riders, coming fast, dust rising behind them. Eliza's heart seized with fear until she realized it wasn't bounty hunters or Thomas's men. It was a telegram courier, riding hard for the marshal's office. Wonder what that's about, Mrs. Whitfield murmured. They found out an hour later when Marshal Hendricks appeared at the Whitfield house, his expression grave. You're going to want to hear this, he said, handing the telegram to Mrs. Whitfield. She read it aloud, her voice shaking. Thomas Garrett arrested this morning by territorial authorities. Evidence of arsenic purchase matching timeline of Margaret Moore's illness discovered in his personal effects during raid on his property. Confession obtained. Suspect in custody pending trial. Silence filled the room. Eliza felt the world tilt, felt Caleb's steadying hand on her elbow, keeping her upright. He confessed? She whispered. Apparently the authorities moved faster than I expected, Hendricks said. Your letters started an investigation. They raided Garrett's ranch this morning, found poison, found records. Confronted with the evidence, he broke down and admitted to poisoning your mother. Also admitted to planning to force you into marriage to Brennan to keep you under his control. It's over, Eliza said numbly. It's really over. Not completely. There will be a trial, and you'll likely need to testify. But yes, Miss Moore, the danger's past. Thomas Garrett will hang for what he did. Eliza's legs gave out completely. She sat down hard on Mrs. Whitfield's sofa, her whole body shaking. It was over. The nightmare that had consumed her life was actually over. She felt Mrs. Whitfield's arms around her, heard the older woman's soothing voice, heard Marshal Hendricks excuse himself, heard the door close. And through it all, she felt Caleb's presence, steady and constant, the anchor that had kept her from drowning. When she finally looked up, eyes red from crying, he was sitting across from her, his expression gentle. You did it, he said quietly. You were brave enough to run, strong enough to stand your ground, and you got justice for your mother. You should be proud. I couldn't have done it without you. Yes, you could have. You're stronger than you know. But his eyes were soft, and something in them made Eliza's heart ache. Mrs. Whitfield stood, tactful as always. I'll make more tea. Give you two a moment. When they were alone, Eliza and Caleb sat in silence. There was so much to say, and no words adequate to say it. What happens now? Eliza finally asked. Now you build a new life. Here, with Mrs. Whitfield, or wherever you choose. You're free, Eliza, truly free. And you? Caleb looked away. I've got my roots, people depending on me. I should probably head out in a day or two. Just like that? You're leaving? That was always the plan. But his voice lacked conviction. Eliza studied him, this man who'd saved her life in more ways than one, who'd kept his promise to earn her trust, who'd shown her that not all men were monsters. What if the plan changed? Eliza, you said it yourself back on the prairie. Plans change, sometimes. She leaned forward. I'm not asking you to give up your roots or your solitary life. I'm just asking if maybe, sometimes, you could come back this way. Visit. Let me know you're all right. Caleb met her eyes, and the longing in them was unmistakable. I'm not good at staying, Eliza, at being close to people. The walls close in and Then don't stay. Just come back. Her voice was soft but steady. I'm not asking for promises or commitments. I'm just asking to be your friend. Is that something you could do? He was quiet for a long time. Then, slowly, he nodded. Yeah, I think I could do that. Relief and something warmer flooded through Eliza. It wasn't everything, but it was a beginning. Mrs. Whitfield returned with tea, and the conversation shifted to practical matters. Where Eliza would live, what she would do with the ranch once it was released from legal custody, how she would rebuild her life. Through it all, Caleb stayed, offering quiet advice when asked, mostly just listening. As evening fell and Mrs. Whitfield began preparing dinner, Caleb stood. I should let you two have some time. I'll be in the carriage house if you need anything. Caleb, Eliza said, stopping him at the door. Thank you for everything, for stepping back that first night, for keeping your word, for being exactly who you are. He smiled, a real smile that transformed his face. You're welcome. And Eliza, what I said before, about you being stronger than you know, I meant it. You're going to be just fine. So are you, she said softly. He left, and Eliza watched through the window as he crossed to the carriage house, his figure silhouetted against the setting sun. Mrs. Whitfield came to stand beside her. That's a good man. I know. And you care for him. It wasn't a question. Eliza nodded. I do, but it's complicated. Love usually is. Mrs. Whitfield squeezed her shoulder. But take it from an old woman. The complicated ones are often worth the effort. Give him time. Let him come back to you. If it's meant to be, he will. That night, in a real bed with clean sheets and a locked door she controlled, Eliza slept deeply for the first time in half a year. No nightmares haunted her. No fear lurked at the edges of her dreams. She was free. Her mother had justice. And somewhere in the carriage house, a lonely cowboy who'd earned her trust was learning that maybe, just maybe, he didn't have to be alone forever. The story wasn't over. But the darkest chapter had finally closed, and whatever came next would be Eliza's choice to make. That, more than anything, was victory enough. Morning came too quickly, and with it the knowledge that Caleb would be leaving. Eliza had known it was coming, had even told herself she was prepared for it, but when she came downstairs and saw him in the kitchen with his saddlebags already packed, the reality hit her like a physical blow. He was leaving. The man who'd saved her, protected her, earned her trust word by careful word. He was riding away. Coffee's fresh, Mrs. Whitfield said from the stove, her tone carefully neutral. She'd clearly seen the expression on Eliza's face. Mr. Hayes was just telling me about his route schedule. Caleb stood when Eliza entered, that small gesture of respect that was so characteristic of him. Morning, I was hoping to catch you before I left. You're leaving now? This morning? Eliza tried to keep the disappointment from her voice and failed completely. Have to. I'm already 3 days behind schedule. People are expecting mail, messages. I can't just abandon my obligations. But something in his eyes suggested leaving wasn't as easy as he was making it sound. Mrs. Whitfield busied herself at the stove, giving them the illusion of privacy. Eliza poured herself coffee. She didn't want just to have something to do with her hands. "How long will you be gone?" she asked quietly. "My full circuit takes about 6 weeks, sometimes longer if weather's bad or there's trouble." Caleb picked up his own coffee cup, not drinking, just holding it. "But I come through Redstone Fort regularly. It's one of my standard stops." 6 weeks. It felt like forever. "Eliza." He set down his cup and looked at her directly. "You're going to be fine here. Better than fine. Mrs. Whitfield will help you settle, get your affairs in order. The marshal will keep you safe, and you're strong enough now to stand on your own. You don't need me." "I know I don't need you." The words came out sharper than she intended. "That's not the point." "Then what is the point?" She struggled to find the words. "How did you tell someone that they'd become essential to you in just a few days? That the thought of them riding away felt like losing something precious you'd only just found?" "The point is that I want you to come back," she finally said. "Not because I need rescuing or protecting. Just because I want to know you're all right. Because I care what happens to you." Caleb's expression softened. "I told you I'd come back. I keep my promises." "I know, I just—" Eliza set down her coffee cup before she could drop it. "I'm afraid that once you leave, you'll remember how much you prefer being alone. That 6 weeks will turn into 6 months, and then you'll just stop coming back at all." "That won't happen." "How can you be sure?" He was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "Because, for the first time in 8 years, I don't want to be alone. And that scares the hell out of me, but it's true." The admission hung in the air between them. Mrs. Whitfield made a discreet exit, muttering something about checking the garden. "Caleb," Eliza said softly, "I'm not asking you to change who you are. I'm not asking you to give up your routes or your freedom or anything else. I'm just asking you to let me be part of your life, however that looks. Whatever you can give. What if what I can give isn't enough? What if I hurt you by being exactly who I am, someone who needs space and solitude, who can't stay in one place, who might never be able to give you the kind of life you deserve? You think I don't know what it's like to need space? To need control over your own life?" Eliza moved closer, not quite touching him, but close enough that she could see the conflict in his eyes. "I just spent 6 months trapped, controlled, owned by a man who saw me as property. The last thing I want is to trap someone else or be trapped again. So if what you can give is your friendship, your honesty, and the occasional visit when your route brings you through, that's enough. That's more than enough." Caleb reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand. It was only the second time he'd initiated touch, and the warmth of his calloused palm against hers sent heat through her entire body. "You're remarkable," he said quietly. "You know that? I'm just someone who's learned that freedom and connection aren't opposites, that you can care about someone and still be your own person." She squeezed his hand. "Come back, Caleb. When you're ready. I'll be here." He nodded, and she saw him swallow hard. 6 weeks. Maybe less if I make good time. "I'll count the days." They stood there for another moment, hands clasped, something unspoken but powerful passing between them. Then Caleb gently released her hand and stepped back, putting that careful distance between them again. "I should go." Daylight's burning. Eliza walked him out to where Smoke stood saddled and ready. The horse huffed at her, and she rubbed his nose, whispering, "Take care of him for me." Caleb mounted with that easy grace she'd come to admire, settling into the saddle like he belonged there. From horseback, he looked down at her, and the longing in his expression nearly broke her heart. "Stay safe," he said. "And Eliza, what you said before about me being exactly who I am, same goes for you. Don't let anyone ever make you small again." "I won't, I promise." He touched the brim of his hat in farewell, and then he was riding away, Smoke's hooves kicking up small clouds of dust. Eliza stood in the yard and watched until he disappeared around a bend in the road, her hand raised in a wave he probably couldn't see. Mrs. Whitfield appeared beside her, silent and understanding. "He'll come back," the older woman said. "You sound certain." "I am. That man looks at you like you're water in the desert. He'll come back." She looped her arm through Eliza's. In the meantime, let's get you settled properly. We have business to attend to." The business proved extensive. Over the following weeks, Eliza worked with Mrs. Whitfield and a lawyer to sort through the legal aftermath of Thomas Garrett's arrest. The ranch she'd grown up on was technically hers now, but Eliza couldn't bear the thought of living there, couldn't stomach the idea of walking halls where her mother had died. "Sell it," she told the lawyer. "All of it. The land, the house, everything. I want nothing that belonged to Thomas Garrett." The sale took 3 weeks to finalize, but when it did, Eliza found herself with a substantial sum of money, enough to buy property of her own, to live comfortably, to build whatever life she chose. "What will you do?" Mrs. Whitfield asked one evening as they sat on her porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. "I don't know yet," Eliza admitted. "For so long I was just trying to survive. Now that I can actually choose, I find myself paralyzed by possibility." "That's not paralysis, dear. That's freedom. Take your time. Figure out who you are when you're not running or hiding or fighting. The answer will come." So Eliza did take her time. She helped Mrs. Whitfield with her charity work, visiting families in need, bringing food and supplies to homesteads struggling through hard times. She read voraciously from Mrs. Whitfield's extensive library, reacquainting herself with the joy of learning without fear. She took long walks through Redstone Fort, learning the rhythms of the town, meeting people, slowly building a life. And she waited. 4 weeks after Caleb left, a letter arrived. Mrs. Whitfield brought it to Eliza with a knowing smile. The handwriting was rough but legible, the words economical in typical Caleb fashion. Eliza made it to Carson City without incident. "Weather's been fair, roads clear. Had a run-in with a family whose wagon broke down 50 miles from anywhere. Helped them make repairs and get to the next settlement. Reminded me of what you said about freedom and connection not being opposites. You were right. 2 more weeks and I'll be back through Redstone Fort. Hope you're well." Caleb Eliza read the letter 3 times, smiling at the careful way he'd written it, the way even in sparse words she could hear his voice. She wrote back immediately, telling him about the ranch sale, about her work with Mrs. Whitfield, about the small details of her days that somehow felt important to share. She gave the letter to the outgoing mail courier with instructions to deliver it to Caleb Hayes on his route. The waiting became easier after that. She had something to look forward to, a date circled in her mind, even if not on a calendar. 2 weeks, and 3 days later, Eliza was helping Mrs. Whitfield in the garden when she heard hoofbeats on the road. She looked up, shading her eyes against the afternoon sun, and there he was, Caleb Hayes on his gray horse, looking road-worn and dusty and absolutely wonderful. He dismounted before he'd fully reached the gate, and Eliza found herself running, actually running across the yard, all dignity forgotten. She stopped just short of throwing herself at him, suddenly shy. "You came back," she said breathlessly. "Told you I would." His smile transformed his face. "Got your letter. Sounds like you've been busy." "So have you, rescuing stranded families." "Someone had to." He pulled something from his saddlebag, a small bundle wrapped in cloth. "Brought you something. Saw it in a trading post and thought of you." Eliza unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a book, well-worn but intact, a volume of poetry by Elizabeth Barrett Browning. "How did you know I love poetry?" "You mentioned your mother's library. Took a guess." He looked almost embarrassed. "If you already have it—" "I don't, and even if I did, I'd treasure this one more." She hugged the book to her chest. "Thank you, Caleb." Mrs. Whitfield appeared on the porch. "Mr. Hayes, welcome back. I assume you'll be staying for dinner at least." "If it's not an imposition, ma'am." "The only imposition would be you refusing." She smiled. "I'll set another place. You two catch up." They sat on the porch while smoke rested in the corral, and Caleb told her about his circuit, the settlements he'd visited, the people he'd met, the minor adventures he'd had. And Eliza told him about her weeks in Redstone Fort, about her growing friendship with Mrs. Whitfield, about the life she was slowly building. "I've been thinking," she said during a pause in the conversation, "about buying property near here. Nothing big, just a small house with some land, somewhere that's mine." "That sounds good. You putting down roots?" "Permanent enough that people can find me. Flexible enough that I'm not trapped." She looked at him carefully. There'd be space for a guest. If you ever wanted to stay for more than a night when you passed through. Caleb was quiet, and Eliza worried she'd pushed too hard. Then, I'd like that. Having a place to come back to. Somewhere that feels like home. The word hung between them, weighted with meaning. Is that what this could be? Eliza asked softly. Home? Maybe. If you're patient with me. If you can handle me leaving every few weeks, being gone for stretches. He met her eyes. I don't know if I'll ever be able to stay permanently, Eliza. The open road is part of who I am. I know, and I'm not asking you to change that. She reached for his hand, and this time he met her halfway. I'm just asking if we can figure out what this is between us. Take our time, no pressure, just see where it goes. I'd like that too, he said quietly. Dinner that night was warm and full of laughter, Mrs. Whitfield regaling them with stories from her youth. Caleb stayed in the carriage house again, but before he retired, he and Eliza stood in the yard under the stars, talking softly about everything and nothing. How long can you stay this time? She asked. 3 days? I have deliveries due in Millerville, but after that, I'm free for a week before my next scheduled run. Then make the most of 3 days. And they did. Caleb helped Eliza look at properties for sale, offering practical advice about land and water sources and building placement. They rode together through the countryside, Eliza's skills improving dramatically under his patient instruction. They talked for hours, sharing stories from their pasts, their fears and hopes for the future. On the third evening, sitting on Mrs. Whitfield's porch as the sun set, Caleb said quietly, I was wrong before, when I said I preferred being alone. What do you prefer? Eliza asked. This, you, being alone when I need to be, but having someone to come back to. He turned to face her. I'm not good with words, Eliza. Never have been. But I need you to know that you've changed something in me. Made me want things I'd given up on. Like what? Like a future that's more than just the next settlement on my route. Like someone who knows the worst parts of me and cares anyway. Like, he paused, struggling. Like love. Real love built on respect and trust and choice. Eliza's breath caught. Caleb, I know it's too soon to say it. We barely know each other, and I'm gone more than I'm here, and I come with more baggage than a stagecoach, but I need you to know that's where this is heading for me. I'm falling in love with you, Eliza Moore. Have been since you stood your ground against those bounty hunters. Tears pricked her eyes. You want to know something? I whispered. I'm afraid of you that first night. And you stepped back. That's when it started for me. Not the fear ending, that took longer, but the possibility that you might be different, that you might be someone worth trusting. And now? Now I'm not afraid anymore. Now I think I might be falling in love with you too. She took his hand. But you're right, it's early. So let's take our time. Let's build this slowly, on our terms, with honesty and patience. You keep riding your routes. I'll build my home here, and we'll figure out how to make both those things work together. Caleb lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently. That sounds perfect. He left the next morning, but the parting was easier this time. They had a plan now, a future they were building together, piece by careful piece. The months that followed established a pattern. Caleb would ride his circuit, and every 6 to 8 weeks he'd pass through Redstone Fort. Sometimes he'd stay for a few days, sometimes a week if his schedule allowed. They wrote letters between visits, sharing the details of their separate lives, slowly learning each other's rhythms and patterns. Eliza bought her property, a small house on 5 acres just outside town, with a view of the prairie and enough space for a garden. She furnished it simply but comfortably, making sure there was a room that could be Caleb's when he visited. She started teaching reading to children in town whose families couldn't afford formal schooling, finding purpose in helping others the way she'd been helped. And she waited, but it wasn't the desperate waiting of before. It was anticipation, joy, the knowledge that when Caleb did return, their time together would be all the sweeter for the separation. 6 months after Caleb first rode away from Redstone Fort, he came back with a proposal that surprised her. I've been thinking, he said as they sat on the porch of her new house, about adjusting my route. There's another rider willing to take the northern settlements if I focus on the southern loop. It would mean I'd be through here every 3 weeks instead of 6. Eliza's heart leaped, but she forced herself to ask, "Is that what you want? Or are you doing it because you think it's what I want?" "It's what I want. Being away from you for 6 weeks at a time is getting harder, not easier." He took her hand. "I'm not ready to stop riding. Might never be. But I can change how I ride. Make this place more of a hub instead of just another stop on the circuit." "You're sure?" "I'm sure." He pulled her closer, and she went willingly, resting her head on his shoulder. "I love you, Eliza. I want to build a life with you. It might not look like everyone else's life, but it'll be ours." "I love you too," she whispered, "and I don't want everyone else's life. I want this one, with you." They were married quietly 9 months after the day Eliza had whispered she was afraid. Mrs. Whitfield stood as witness, along with Marshall Hendricks and his wife. No big ceremony, no fancy dress, just two people who'd found each other in a storm, promising to weather all the storms to come together. Caleb moved his base to Eliza's house, though moved was perhaps too strong a word. He still rode out every 3 weeks, carrying mail and messages across the territory. But he came home to her now, to the house they shared, to the life they were building, piece by piece, and Eliza thrived. She expanded her teaching, started a small library for the town, worked with Mrs. Whitfield on various charitable causes. When Caleb was home, they rode together across the prairie, talking and laughing and learning the shape of marriage between two independent souls. It wasn't always easy. Caleb still struggled with staying in one place for too long, still had nightmares about the war that left him restless and distant. Eliza still had moments of fear, old patterns from her time with Thomas that she had to actively fight against. But they worked through it together. They talked. They gave each other space when needed and came together when possible. They built trust not once, but continuously, choosing each other day after day. 2 years after their wedding, on a stormy night that reminded Eliza of the night she'd fled, she stood at the window watching lightning crack across the sky. Caleb came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "You all right?" he asked softly. "Just remembering." She leaned back against him. "That night I showed up at your cabin, terrified and desperate. I whispered that I was afraid of you. I remember. You were soaked through, shaking like a leaf. And you stepped back. You said you'd earn my trust." She turned in his arms to face him. "Did you know then what that would mean, where it would lead?" Caleb smiled, that rare full smile that still made her heart skip. "Not even close. I just knew you needed help, and I was in a position to give it. It became so much more than that." "It did." He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "Best decision I ever made, stepping back. Gave us both the space to choose this, to choose each other." Outside, thunder rolled across the prairie. Inside, warm and safe and loved, Eliza thought about the woman she'd been that stormy night, broken, terrified, convinced that all men were monsters. She thought about the man who'd proven her wrong, not with grand gestures or pretty words, but with consistent decency, with patience, with respect. She thought about trust earned, not demanded, about love chosen, not forced, about freedom found in connection rather than isolation. "What are you thinking?" Caleb asked, reading her expression. "That I'm grateful. For the storm that brought me to you. For your sister's memory that made you help me. For every choice we made that led us here." She kissed him softly. "I'm grateful for all of it." "Even the hard parts?" "Especially those. They made this possible." She gestured around them, at the home they'd built, the life they'd created. "We earned this, Caleb. Both of us. We earned each other." He held her close as the storm raged outside, and Eliza felt nothing but peace. She'd been right all those months ago. Freedom and connection weren't opposites. You could be your own person and belong to someone at the same time. You could be loved without being owned. You could be safe without being trapped. And you could build a life with someone who understood that the greatest gift you could give was the freedom to be exactly who you were. Years later, when people asked Eliza about her marriage, about how she and Caleb made it work despite his constant traveling, she would smile and tell them the truth. "He earned my trust," she'd say, "and I gave him my heart. Everything else was just details." And on stormy nights, when the rain hammered the roof and lightning split the sky, Eliza would remember that first terrible storm, the flight, the fear, the whispered admission of terror. And Caleb's answer, the 5 words that had changed everything. Then I'll earn your trust. He had. Every single day, he had. And in earning her trust, he'd won her love. It was more than enough. It was everything. The prairie wind whispered through the grass, carrying their story across the endless miles. A story of fear overcome, trust earned, and love freely chosen. A story of 2 wounded souls who'd found healing in each other's honesty. A story that began with a cowboy stepping back and ended with 2 hearts stepping forward together. Forever.